Moana Maki.
Thank you. Oh, don't. It's like that, Chris Farfoy. I'm allowed to speak. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you can see, a number of Labour members are very keen to speak on the preamble to this legislation. It's very important legislation. The Royal Society is an institution in New Zealand, as my colleague Charles Chauvel pointed out. And from my perspective as a member of the Royal Society, in particular, this is a very important piece of legislation. But many people have referred to this legislation as breaking new ground or being a great stride forward. And in fact, at its very most basic sense, it's actually going back to the very first roots of the Royal Society when it was first formed in the United Kingdom. The Royal Society was formed in the 17th century in the United Kingdom, and after that very quickly followed the Enlightenment. And of course the Enlightenment brought together not just scientists but artists and philosophers and people from all walks of life who had an interest in learning and discovering, and they all came together. And there was no distinction between those who wanted to study biology or physics or learn how the universe worked and those who wanted to understand how humans interacted in that world and how the human influence both interacted on the physical world and how the physical world interacted on human existence. And over the course of the last 200 or 300 years, in fact, what we've seen within the community of the Royal Society has been a parting of the ways between people who were very much all together in the same kind of culture, very much together in the same a kind of common goal of human enlightenment. And so here we find ourselves, and as a scientist I absolutely acknowledge that science is very hierarchical. The minute you enter into it you learn that there is a pecking order, just as the kind of, the people in Europe tell jokes about the Belgians, there are people in science who tell jokes about people who have certain degrees. It's quite a culture shock when you go into it and realise that not all degrees are created equal in science. And so you go down through the pecking order, and when you come up through that culture you kind of very much accept it. And it's partly because scientists are very proud of their qualifications. They're very proud to be part of a community that contributes not only so much to the economy of their country and to the education of their country, but also to the progression of human achievement and the progression of the human race. And that's really where that comes from. But in bringing the humanities into the Royal Society, it will in no way dilute the mission of the Royal Society. It will in no way alter its path, and it isn't a massive step forward. What it is going back to the very roots, the creation of this organisation, where philosophers, where humanitarians, where social scientists worked alongside their companions. And this is very important because I think we saw this in the climate change debate. You cannot separate out the physical world and the studies to understand the physical world and the patterns that occur in that world from human involvement, human interaction and human influence. And just in the same light, you can't separate out how human thought and attitude is going to impact on scientific progress. And I think of the genetic modification debate as being a classic example of where science was on one page and the public was on the other. You cannot separate the two out. And for a long time we have been doing that. For a long time they have existed very separately from each other. And I want to congratulate the work being done by Otago University. When myself and my colleague David Shearer went and visited them at Otago University, they were doing a lot of it's called multidisciplinary work, where they already bring together social scientists and economists, not just social scientists, but economists and lawyers and pure scientists, in order to make sure that, for example, one of the projects they were doing was about renewable energy. Well, everyone thinks renewable energy is great, but can anyone think of a single renewable energy project that didn't have massive public opposition in the community in which it was based? So here we have a disconnect between science doing a lot of work in an area that's incredibly important not only to our economy but our environment, doing it for all the right reasons, knowing that when asked abstractly in a survey, do you think we should have more renewable energy, people will say yes, but then put the wind turbines in, put the tidal turbines in, and suddenly the local community reacts in a very different way that's not anticipated, and then it can actually slow down progress in that area significantly. And there is work being done at Otago University around this very issue, around saying, well, what is missing and this is very relevant for politicians when we push these policies. Where is that, Mr Chair, Mr Chair, Mr Chair, Mr Chair, Mr Chair, Mr Chair?
Moana Mackie.
Thank you. Where is that disconnect between... It is a disconnect. Where is the disconnect? Where is science not taking the people along with them, and vice versa? And vice versa. And the Royal Society bringing these two disciplines together is another step along that path of recognising that the two cannot actually exist separately from each other. And going back to the discovery of New Zealand by the English, you know, you look at, it was actually the Royal Society that was supporting Captain Cook's journey down to the Pacific to observe the transit of Venus. You know, the crew that was on board the Endeavour was very representative of what you would see in the Enlightenment. It was a variety of people, not just pure scientists. And that was very much the way in which the Royal Society operated, and it's nice to see the Royal Society going back to its roots in that respect and valuing the work that the humanities provides and valuing the aspect that they bring. And of course, it's also very important for the humanities to be able to benefit, as Alan Petrie said, although I don't think I'd be quite so dismissive of the social scientists and humanities as he is, that it is very good for the humanities to be able to benefit also from the kind of the scientific methods and the scientific disciplines that come. And this is an area where I think we could get more young people interested in science, because science is seen as in schools by a lot of students as something that they just don't want to do. There's a bit of stigma around it. It's kind of either you like it or you don't. It's not one of those grey areas. But if we're able to introduce far more scientific methods, far more scientific discipline into the everyday teaching of a lot of the humanities subjects, which are popular with a number of students, then even if they don't go on to do the pure science qualifications, just the development of those skills, the ability to critically analyse information, to critically analyse data will be of enormous importance. And sometimes you don't realise when you are doing a science degree that the skills that you do pick up along the way in terms of the ability to read research. And as members of this House will know, we get sent endless amounts of research. And I do want to come back to what Alan Petrie said when he criticised a lot of the work that was being done in the education area, because I think it's wrong. Science, the way science works is not that you're only ever going to get one opinion because there's a right or a wrong. Science is about the reduction of doubt. It is not about the elimination of doubt. And maybe in the scientific community, in order for public consumption, that's been kind of dumbed down a little bit to say, yes, science can give you an absolute answer, yes or no. But when you study science, you are taught it is the reduction of doubt. And there are always going to be competing interests and there are always going to be competing opinions. And what you do is you put that all together and you look at the entire body of work. And I don't know what particular research he was talking about, but I know that there's some very, very good education research that's going on, and I know that it follows very, very strict scientific disciplines in terms of the way that the analysis is carried out. There's also some very bad research out there across the board in every single area, and I have to say, those that say that climate change is not real, some of that research is the dodgiest research I've ever read in terms of actually following scientific discipline. It's not peer-reviewed because it knows it wouldn't stand up to peer review. And maybe if we can get more of the scientific discipline taught through the humanities in our schools, then we're going to be able to get that critical thinking into a lot more of our young people, even if they don't go on to do those pure science subjects, which I think would be particularly important. And particularly, as one of my colleagues pointed out earlier, as we lose things like science advisors, you know, which were critically important in terms of making sure that primary school teachers who didn't have a background in science had access to the information that they needed to be able to engage those youngsters who were interested in this area. Well, we've lost those because the government cut funding for them in the budget, so they've gone. And then the government say, oh, well, we might bring them back next year. Oh, it's too late. They've gone overseas. These were people who were very highly in demand around the world, and they've now left. They've been picked up by other people, and our schools and science in our schools is going to be the poorer for that. And then you don't need any kind of research to tell you that. you just know the value, well, we on this side of the House know that the value that those people added to science education in our schools was invaluable. It's one of the reasons why we do particularly well in science and international tests. It will be interesting to see how much that continues, because of course in these national standards, which we've I think ascertained are not based on evidence at all, but based on political rhetoric, which is one of the tragic things about politics. Yeah.